All right, let's get right into it. When you're walking through the grocery store, have you ever really stopped to think about what goes into designing the food on the shelves? You might think it's all about taste, or maybe nutrition. But what if I told you that for a huge chunk of what we eat, the real playbook was actually written by the tobacco industry?
You know that feeling, right? You open a bag of chips, planning to have just a few, and then, poof, the bag's empty. We've all been there. And it's so easy to blame ourselves, to think, oh, I just have no willpower. But what if it's not about willpower at all? What if that feeling of not being able to stop was actually engineered into the food?
Because, as it turns out, it's no accident. That almost magnetic pull that so many processed foods have, that's the result of decades of very careful, very deliberate, and very scientific design. And it's all aimed at one single goal: making sure you eat more than you plan to.
So there's actually a scientific name for this: hyper-palatable. It basically means foods with the perfect storm of fat, sugar, and salt creates this sensory explosion in your mouth that's so rewarding it can literally hijack your brain's chemistry. It's designed to blast right past your body's natural, "Hey, I'm full," signals. You just don't find these kinds of combinations in nature, so our bodies never really learned how to deal with them. And this is where it gets really wild. Take a look at this comparison. On the left, you've got your ultra-processed foods, engineered with that optimized hit of sugar and fat. And on the right, cigarettes with their optimized dose of nicotine. Both are designed for rapid delivery to the brain. Both use additives to make the experience better. It's the exact same design philosophy.
And I want to be super clear here. This isn't just some clever analogy. For a really crucial period in modern food history, this connection was totally literal. The very same companies that were perfecting the cigarette were also running the companies making your mac and cheese. Let's just rewind the clock for a second. Back in the 1980s, big tobacco giants, we're talking Philip Morris, the Marlboro guys, R.J. Reynolds, they went on a massive shopping spree. They bought up huge food companies like Kraft and General Foods. So for more than a decade, from the late 80s to the early 2000s, they were some of the absolute biggest players in the American food system.
So what happened when Big Tobacco was in charge of the pantry? Well, we don't have to guess. A recent study dug into the data, and the results are pretty stunning. As you can see here, food products made by these tobacco-owned companies were way more likely to be hyper-palatable. We're talking 29% more likely to have that magic fat and sodium combo, and a staggering 80% more likely to have the carb and sodium blend that's engineered to make you overeat. Okay, so you've got these foods hitting the market, and pretty soon scientists and public health folks start raising some serious alarms about them. So how did the industry react? Well, at first, they went straight to page 1 of the old Big Tobacco playbook: total denial and all-out attack.
They called it a scorched earth strategy, and it was brutal. Their tactics were straight up aggressive: attack the science that made their products look bad, fund fake grassroots groups to fight regulations, use their immense political power to block any new health policies, and even go after the researchers themselves, trying to discredit them. But here's the thing. By the late 90s, they had a front-row seat to how badly that strategy had failed for Big Tobacco, leading to those massive lawsuits and crippling regulations. They learned a lesson from that failure. This quote from a former Kraft VP just says it all. He realized it was way better to disarm their critics than to keep fighting a war they were destined to lose.
And that realization sparked a huge pivot. I mean, a dramatic shift in strategy. They basically threw out that old confrontational playbook and rolled out a brand new one. It was far more subtle and, you could argue, way more effective. It was a strategy based on co-option.
And the whole goal of this new strategy is simple and, honestly, kind of brilliant. You stop being the villain in the story, and you reposition yourself as a key partner in solving the very health problems that people are concerned about. Instead of fighting public health, you join them. You become part of the solution. So how does that actually work? How do you pull that off? Well, this new playbook really just boils down to a 3-step process. First, you get to control the rules of the game. Second, you win over the experts and your critics. And third, you figure out a way to profit from the fix.
So the first tactic is all about getting ahead of things. Before the government can come in and slap on strict, mandatory regulations, the industry volunteers its own set of rules, which are, of course, a lot weaker. It's a way of controlling the entire conversation by writing the rules yourself.
And you see this playbook used over and over. You know, back in the early 2000s, when pressure was building, Kraft and Coca-Cola suddenly made these big pledges about marketing to kids in schools. More recently, with the threat of sugar taxes looming, companies like PepsiCo have launched their own big sugar reduction plans. It's always just enough to take the air out of the room for real tough regulation. All right, tactic number 2 is all about building relationships and, maybe more importantly, legitimacy. Because hey, if you're seen as a partner by respected health groups and government agencies, it's a whole lot harder for anyone to paint you as the bad guy.
And they have a whole toolkit for this. They sponsor scientific conferences, they fund research studies, they form these high-profile partnerships with groups like the American Heart Association, they make sure they get a seat at the table on government policy committees, it gets them inside access, and a ton of influence.
And now for the final piece of the puzzle, and this might be the most ingenious part of the whole thing. You take the public's growing demand for healthier food and you turn it into a brand new, highly profitable business. You essentially monetize the solution to the problem you helped create in the first place.
So you see these giant corporations buying up organic, plant-based, and natural brands, a lot of times without changing the parent company name on the label. It's called stealth ownership. At the same time, they'll reformulate their classic products, lower the sugar just enough to get a healthier label, all while expanding their total market share. It is a win-win for their bottom line.
Okay, so we've looked at the playbook, the old one and the new one. But what does all this history of deliberate engineering and clever corporate strategy, what does it actually mean for us? For the average person just trying to buy groceries for the week?
Well, it means this. 68%. Right now, an estimated 68% of the entire U.S. food supply is considered hyper-palatable. These scientifically designed, hard-to-resist foods, they aren't the exception anymore, they are the norm. It's like we're all swimming in this water, which makes choosing to swim in a different direction incredibly hard.
And this really gets to a critical point from Dr. Ashley Gearhart, who is a leading researcher on this. Her argument is that when a problem is this huge and this systemic, you can't solve it by just telling people to try harder. The problem isn't a lack of individual willpower, it's the result of industrial design. And so the solution? It has to target the industry itself.
Which leaves us with one last, big question to think about. We've seen how these ultra-processed foods can be engineered, just like cigarettes, to be craved. We've seen that for years, the very same companies were making both products. And we've seen how the food industry uses the exact same political playbook to fight back against regulation. So, if the playbook is the same, shouldn't the rules be too?